we are here with Mr. Daniel Sarmiento. He's a professor of administrative EU law at the Universidad Complutense of Madrid. He's part of the Council at Uría Menéndez since 2016. He's a former legal secretary at the Court of Justice of the EU, and he's a member of Fide Academic Council and an expert on Brexit. In fact, moments ago he was part of the Brexit panel at the Fide Congress in Oxford. So we're here to speak a little bit about Brexit. Brexit, we're 6 weeks away, no formal agreement yet. And the problem seems to be the Irish backstop, right? So even if we get a solution on the Irish backstop, would this solve the problem of Brexit at this point, only 6 weeks away?
Not necessarily. There is this conception that the problem is the backstop, but in fact, at the moment in the United Kingdom, there is considerable opposition to any kind of agreement between the UK and the EU for different kinds of reasons. So even if there is an alternative to the backstop negotiated very quickly, it's difficult to see how, for example, a large number of the Labour Party MPs would support a withdrawal agreement that they have rejected 3 times already in the past few months, with only an amendment to a protocol, which is an important protocol, but an amendment that doesn't change the nature of the agreement. And the same applies to the hardcore Brexiteer MPs, who not only detest the backstop, but they detest the entire withdrawal agreement. For the hardcore Brexiteers, it's not just about the backstop, it's about many other things. So even if there is a solution to the current backstop and both parties find an alternative, it's politically uncertain that the government would be able to find a majority in Parliament to pass that agreement.
Great. So what are the alternatives so far of the Irish backstop? So we mentioned that even if they reach an agreement on the Irish backstop, it is possible that they won't pass the bill. What are the current alternatives that are being observed to solve this problem?
There are a few alternatives to the backstop. I think that first of all, I should say that the solutions to the backstop are practically are impossible. The backstop, which in fact it's not really a backstop. It's more like an insurance scheme for the Republic of Ireland. It's supposed to act as a default option in the case that in the future the United Kingdom and the EU do not achieve an ambitious trade agreement. That's when the backstop kicks in. So what the challenge of the backstop is finding a solution that allows the island of Ireland to remain as a single market, but without putting Northern Ireland inside the internal market.
Right.
So it sounds like Mission Impossible. So I think it's important from the outset that we have to realize that there is no perfect solution to the backstop. So some kind of compromise has to be achieved that will undermine in a certain way the internal market, and it will also undermine the sovereignty of the UK. But I think that both parties have understood that, and if they do agree on a backstop, it will be assuming that they will have to give way on certain key points for both of them. Now the alternatives that are floating around, in a certain way, there is one which is the simplest solution, which is the alternative that the EU proposed to the UK at an early stage of the negotiations, which is to create a customs union only for the island of Ireland. This would be the simplest solution, and this would automatically put the territory of Northern Ireland within the internal market for the purposes of goods, not services, not workers, but goods. But that is the main problem. And at the same time, it would raise the tricky question that this scheme would introduce a sort of commercial frontier between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom. So that was politically unpalatable for the United Kingdom, so it was rejected. An alternative to that solution to the backstop is an alternative that I have been proposing together with Jonathan Fowler and Joseph Weiler. We have proposed a solution that we called the dual autonomy solution, which in fact it's quite simple and straightforward, which entails that in Northern Ireland the rules on trade of goods from the EU would apply, but only to producers and exporters targeting the Irish market, and vice versa. So UK rules on goods would apply to producers and exporters in the Republic of Ireland targeting Northern Ireland. And that would introduce an element of flexibility for both parties, because it would allow all other producers in Northern Ireland to be subject to UK law. It wouldn't lock in the United Kingdom into a pseudo-customs union depriving the UK of its commercial policy, so the UK would be able to reach trade deals with third countries. And that solution would be backed up with criminal penalties, so that the breach of EU law by those producers and exporters in Northern Ireland would be enforced through criminal law in the United Kingdom, and vice versa in Ireland. That proposal, it's much more complex of course, but it introduces elements of enforcement also from the current backstop, and that is a workable solution. The Financial Times a couple of weeks ago called it a win-win solution for both sides. So as you can see, there are options, there are alternatives to the backstop. The problem with the current backstop, and why it's difficult to change it, is because the current backstop is probably way too ambitious. We shouldn't forget that the backstop, as it stands now, the withdrawal agreement, is not an Irish backstop. It's wrongly called an Irish backstop, but in fact it's a UK backstop, because it puts the entirety of the United Kingdom in a situation close to a customs union with the European Union. And the result of that is that the entirety of the UK's legislative agenda on goods will be subject to EU law. And that result is what, for Westminster and for Parliament, is unpalatable. And I understand the reasons why they have rejected it. So, alternatives to that backstop, which is the one that is currently in the withdrawal agreement, exist. And what is a little bit surprising is that what the current UK government is now proposing is going back to a customs union in the island of Ireland, which is something that was politically unpalatable for Theresa May's government, because it would introduce a commercial frontier, shattering the unity of the kingdom in two. But now it appears that it is a palatable option for the current Prime Minister, which is surprising, at least for me.
And so in this agreement, or in the current backstop, the one that has been proposed by the European Union, or that is in the withdrawal agreement that has been refused, the UK could not or would not be able to negotiate with commercial deals with other countries, right?
Not really. Although it would remain, it would keep its own trade policy. The truth is that the backstop introduces a death trap for the United Kingdom, because the backstop kicks in the case that the EU and the UK are unable to reach a trade deal which is at least as ambitious as the backstop. Since the backstop is a pseudo customs union, the future trade agreement that allows the backstop to be repealed would have to be a customs union. And once you're in a customs union, you cannot strike any deals on goods with third countries. You will be able to strike trade deals on services, intellectual property, on certain areas, but not on goods. But as you know, goods is the key element of international trade. And the current backstop puts the UK in a trap that practically deprives the UK from having its own trade deals on goods in the future.
Yes, I see the Irish backstop, the current backstop, will serve as an anchor for the future trade deal.
Exactly.
And that's the problem.
Exactly.
So, we talked a little bit about all the other options, or all the available options for the backstop. Which ones are the preferred for the European Union
Well, the perfect option for the EU is having a customs union in the island of Ireland. That is the simplest solution. It solves the Irish problem, and it has the support of similar arrangements with third countries. So that is the clear-cut solution for the EU. For reasons we've discussed before, to date that has been just unpracticable
Right.
for the United Kingdom. Where will we go in the following weeks? It's a bit of a mystery, but definitely for the EU that is a preferred option.
Right. At this point, it seems that Brexit is reversible, non-reversible. What's your opinion?
I think you can make a distinction there between whether it is legally reversible and whether it is politically reversible. Whether it is legally reversible was subject to discussion until a couple of months ago. The Court of Justice in Luxembourg had to rule on that issue, and the court said that an application for withdrawal is revocable, which gives the withdrawing member state considerable flexibility, but the judgment added that the decision to revoke the withdrawal process has to be unequivocal and unconditional. And that term unequivocal means that a member state that's in the process of withdrawing cannot instrumentalize the revocation just to win extra time.
Right.
And to stretch the 2-year clock. So it is revocable, but only in terms that prove that the member state wants to, in an unequivocal way, put an end to the withdrawal process. In other words, I want to stay.
Right.
In the case of the United Kingdom, that decision would have to be done in line with its constitutional arrangements. Probably, I'm also a constitutional scholar, expert in UK law, but I think that politically an unequivocal decision of the UK would have to entail a referendum, in the same way that in order to submit the first application there was a prior referendum. Probably EU law would require a determination from the British people as powerful as the previous one. And of course we know that is a difficult prospect at the time. Politically, if Brexit is reversible, we need to look at it from two angles. We need to look at it from the UK angle and from the EU angle. From the UK angle, the truth is that Brexit is still an issue that has divided British society very deeply. Right. It's going to carry on dividing UK society. As Derek Wyatt has just told me, the hate of leavers for the EU is way superior to the love of Remainers for the EU.
Right.
And my impression is that the UK's relation with the EU has to be reconsidered in this country. And probably the best way to do that reconsideration is probably outside the European Union. But that's something for the British people to decide. From the EU's perspective, the truth is that it's not good for the process of integration to have a member state as large as the United Kingdom, with an ability to distort the integration process because of its size. It's not good to have such a member state in constant existential crisis, because it is a disturbing element for the Union. And it's also important to remember that the UK is a member state that has not committed to join the Euro. It's the only member state that has a total exemption. And at the moment, the EU is deeply, not only committed, but it's also deeply entrenched in the process of creating a single currency that works for everyone. And that has been an objective that in fact has reinforced the integration process. And in the course of the economic crisis, we could see that most of the reforms that were taking place were in order to make the Euro succeed. A member state like the United Kingdom that does not have any appetite at all to join the Euro is a member state that cannot be part of that club in the long term. Right. And that's another reflection that the UK has to do as to its future relationship with the EU. And as I said before, probably that reflection has to be done it's probably better if it's done in the current circumstances that we have outside the EU, so it's not painful for both parties.
Right. So basically, in order for the UK to have a successful relationship with the EU, it must solve its existential crisis outside Europe, or constitutional crisis outside Europe.
Well, the risk of having a member state, and I insist that a member state of the size of the United Kingdom inside the EU going through that existential crisis, including its decision over joining the euro, it's something that probably it's way too destabilizing for the European Union.
Yeah.
It's something that in the long run might have too much of a cost for the European Union. And at the same time, it's something that for the United Kingdom also has an enormous cost. You have to look at the impact that Brexit has had in the United Kingdom, not only in its politics, but also in its economy. And I think it's quite telling that while the United Kingdom is going through this reflection process, it's going through considerable pain, economic, political, and societal pain. And that's not good for a country. And we must remember that at the present time, the member states of the European Union are not the colonial empires they used to be.
Right.
They are small little actors in the world stage, surrounded by giant superpowers, which the UK is not, and which the EU hardly at times reaches to be. So in that context, it's probably better for the United Kingdom to go through that reflection process, which might entail the passage of time. It might entail the arrival of a new generation that looks at the world with different eyes, to the eyes of generations of Britons that have been conditioned by a very hostile press towards the European Union, that have been conditioned by political parties that have made their sole purpose the withdrawal of the European Union. And maybe in the course of future generations, the United Kingdom changes its mind. And I think that if that happens, that would be very positive for both sides, for the UK and for the EU.
But in that case, it should join the monetary union as well, right?
In that case, it would have to be on the conditions that are ordinarily set for all new incoming member states, which include joining the euro, indeed.
Right. Thank you very much. It has been a pleasure talking to you, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.